Lamar Jackson gave you about 9 points per game more than the QB12. Think about that. You draft Lamar Jackson this year, drafted him as a QB4 overall at ADP. You were able to get an incredible amount of production. And with Josh Allen, you were able to get an incredible amount of production and also late season spike weeks when it mattered the most. Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson were drafted very highly in 2023. These two guys were guys that settled in around the 2-3 turn or earlier in some drafts. This year, the market pushed those guys down. Next year, look for both of those players, a huge market correction with both of those players being drafted more highly towards their 2023 levels. We're not going to give out that sort of discount anymore.
What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Fantasy football lessons learned from the 2024 season. What can we learn from 2024 that can help us be better fantasy managers in 2025? What trends are going to continue in fantasy football and what trends are going to continue in the NFL? I'm Theo Gremminger. We are just getting over week 17, but we got to talk about 2025. First thing we're going to talk about is the impact of rookie wide receivers. Rookie wide receivers are not going anywhere. And you're going to say, Theo, the Marvin Harrison Jr., he didn't return value at ADP. Maybe there's going to be a correction in the marketplace, but take away Marvin Harrison Jr. from this class, and this class is still absolutely special. Malik Neighbors going to finish the season as a wide receiver 1 in fantasy. Brian Thomas Jr., arguably the biggest riser in Dynasty at the wide receiver position this season. Unbelievable performance by him. Will join Malik Neighbors as co-wide receiver 1s. Both rookies, both finishing as wide receiver 1s. This is one where this is odd. You never see two inside of the top 12. A couple years back, you had Jamar Chase and Jalen Waddle both having tremendous seasons. Jalen Waddle finished outside of wide receiver 1 land. You've had some very strong wide receiver 2s in terms of the class, but never two finishing inside of wide receiver 1 land. Brian Thomas Jr., what he was able to accomplish, over 1,000 receiving yards, over 80 receptions, over 8 touchdowns. That combination is big time for an alpha outside wide receiver. And Malik Neighbors looks like the kind of guy who could lead the NFL in catches and targets in a particular season. That's a great way to find your wide receiver 1 overall in the year. So both those guys smashed. Ladd McConkey, also an absolute smash pick. I think that his week 17 2-touchdown performance against New England is going to really propel that offseason storyline, help people realize just how big of a leap forward Ladd can take. Xavier Worthy played very well in the fantasy football playoffs. Mixed bag, but this is a player who started to find himself inside this offense. And then Marvin Harrison Jr. This is a guy who was drafted the 1-2 turn this season, probably settles into the 3rd, early 4th round next year and becomes a value because it's not like Harrison Jr. is bad. Harrison Jr. struggled his rookie season at times, but when you put him in perspective of the entire class, this was an amazing class. And when you put this in perspective of fantasy football, where it's going, it's instant impact, young players coming into the league, catching passes, being utilized. It's happening every single season. Puka Nacua, wide receiver 1. Justin Jefferson, wide receiver 1. Jamar Chase, wide receiver 1. Every single season, we're seeing rookies finish as wide receiver 1s. So when we know the draft landing spots for players like Ted McMillan, or if Travis Hunter decides to concentrate on wide receiver, expect these players to be drafted highly. You're not going to be able to steal rookie wide receivers anymore in the future. And let's stick around and look at players on new teams, because another thing that we need to open our minds to as fantasy managers is the impact of free agents. And free agents were not just dominating at the running back spot. So the big contributors, obviously, your Saquon Barkleys, your Derrick Henrys, your Josh Jacobs. These type of players signed with a new team and absolutely thrived. And that's on top of players who also did very well as free agent signings at the running back spot. Not necessarily the impact of a Barkley, Henry, Jacobs, but a guy like a Tony Pollard, J.K. Dobbins, Aaron Jones. All of these players were on new teams this year and absolutely thrived. One team might move on from a player, and another team might view that same player as an impact guy who can help them right away in a newfound role. Free agents, we need to be more open-minded to. And it wasn't just running backs. Jonnu Smith was a player that the fantasy marketplace kind of brushed aside. Tight ends can't do well in a Mike McDaniel offense, but free agent signing, ends up in Miami, thrives, finishes with his best season ever as a pro. Wide receiver position, Darnell Mooney ends up in Atlanta, has number of usable weeks. He was a guy you were finding on waiver wires last year. Did nothing last season in Chicago after doing well earlier in his career. Then at the quarterback position, Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold coming in, doing very well as a free agent quarterback. Now, obviously, there was some injuries along the way in Minnesota, but if you look at the quarterback position as well, Baker Mayfield signed as a free agent as Tom Brady's replacement in Tampa, sort of brushed aside by the marketplace and had a dominant run, including this season, which was his best year as a pro. Look at the other running back from that particular free agent class 2 years ago, David Montgomery. David Montgomery dealt with some injuries towards the end of the year, but if you had him on your fantasy roster, absolutely thrived. So this offseason, when you see a player sign with a team in free agency, and maybe they get a little bit more money than you think they deserved, or maybe you were a little surprised by a team showing that much interest in a player who might not have done as well, or we think of him as a declining asset, just be open-minded to it. Fantasy football scoring can happen when a team values a player differently and the situation improves for that particular player. And speaking of older running backs, it's sort of a crossover lesson learned where we talked about the impact of the free agent running back. What did all those players have in common? They were all old by dynasty standards and certainly by some redraft manager standards. The running back position is one, wear and tear on the body, regression, too many touches over the years, and just getting older in general. The running back position is the position in football where players are supposed to just drop like rocks, but it's not happening. The whole age apex running back drop in terms of production, in terms of quality of play, it seems to be happening less and less frequently, and it's not as pronounced as in the past. In the past, you might have a player who was really, really good and then literally goes down to like a not startable asset, a complete zero. But when we look at the landscape of the running back position this year, towards the very top, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Joe Mixon, all of these particular players were doing extremely well, and they are past the age apex. And when we look at next season, who are we going to draft? Now, certainly we're going to talk about some younger running backs later, and certainly Ashton Genty from Boise State is going to be drafted highly, even though he's going to be a rookie. But when we look at it, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara, Josh Jacobs are all going to be drafted more highly than they were this season. It's crazy. Older running back, but actually gaining ADP value. And it's sort of a mental exercise. Last year, you were able to get Josh Jacobs in the late third round. No chance you're going to be able to get in the late third next year. He's going to go considerably higher than that. How about Saquon Barkley? Last year, you were able to get him at the 1-2 turn, right around pick 12, 11, 13, that sort of range. This year, he's going to challenge for the number one overall spot in most redraft PPR leagues. Then you look at a guy like Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry, how are we going to really drop Derrick Henry off of towards the top? That you could call him a low-end RB1 next year. That's about as far down as we can drop him. And at the end of the day, these players are a year older, but there's somehow their bodies are holding on, their quality of play is holding on, and their teams are showing no indication that they want to move on from them. Alvin Kamara was extended by New Orleans this year. James Conner was extended by Arizona. James Conner is going to be 30 years old next year with a nice contract heading into the season as the starting running back in Arizona. Another player who returned value as an older back. So the age of, I'm going to fade that guy because he's old, there's going to be situations where you're going to want to fade the older back. And certainly if they steam up too highly in ADP, we don't want to pay that ADP price. But in terms of simply saying that player's old, therefore they're going to decline immediately, that's getting fantasy managers in trouble. It has for the last few years. Look at the last few RB1 overalls. This year, Saquon Barkley. The previous season was Christian McCaffrey. The year before that, Austin Eckler. 3 years in a row where the RB1 overall was over the age of 26. Before, this was sort of a young man spot. Now it's a young man spot, but it's also, we're more open-minded to the older running back. And speaking of young running backs, one thing we're going to be doing next season is we're going to be drafting the class of 2023 running backs. This is a special class. I worked on my early redraft rankings for 2025, and I'm going to have 3 running backs from the 2023 class inside my top 8 overall. And this is a year where you have a group of players all from the same draft class that are all going to challenge for RB1 overall status. Bijan Robinson, Devon Achane, and Jahmyr Gibbs, all special players, all putting up exceptional stats, showing tremendous amount of production, and having the sort of usage we want to see. Devon Achane leads all running backs in receptions, all running backs in touchdown catches, all running backs in receiving yardage. We know how explosive he is. Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs, both way up there in terms of total yards leaders. And both of these players are showing their ability as two-way talents. Jahmyr Gibbs, fewer receptions than we want to see, fewer targets, but he is an absolute touchdown machine. Jahmyr Gibbs is up to 15 touchdowns on the season. Unbelievable production for him. When you look at the history of the game, there's not a whole lot of players who have scored more touchdowns in their first 2 years combined than Jahmyr Gibbs. He's up there. He's like top 25 all time in that for the running back position. Bijan Robinson, huge step forward this year. He's over 1,500 combined yards, same as Gibbs. And also Bijan, another year showing that he can catch the football in the NFL. 56 receptions heading into week 17. Bijan also has 10 rushing touchdowns, a huge step forward in year 1 of the Zach Robinson offense. And how can we forget Chase Brown? Chase Brown, unbelievable run for him. The Cincinnati Bengals offense loses Joe Mixon. Chase Brown has to battle out with Zach Moss for the beginning of the year. Moss gets banged up, and Chase Brown simply ran away with this. Over the second half of the season, Chase Brown gave you top 8 running back production on almost a weekly basis. Chase Brown showed the ability to handle a high volume of touches and catch the football. Explosive. We want to be drafting these year 3 running backs a lot. My prediction, Achane, Gibbs, and Bijan, all top 8 picks. All of these guys are going to be in everyone's mix for they can finish RB1 overall. And Chase Brown will be a second-round pick this coming season. So you're going to have 4 backs from the same draft class inside of the top 20 picks. That's awesome. Sticking around with lessons we've learned, let's stick to the tight end position. And Brock Bowers this year sort of reset our mindset that Sam Laporta's year 1 was not a fluke. Rookie tight ends can make an impact. Back-to-back seasons of rookie tight ends getting not only good usage, but great usage. And Bowers' season was way more impressive than Laporta's. Laporta's was terrific. Laporta had a ton of touchdown catches. Laporta went over 100 targets. Laporta played great. He earned that tight end 1 overall spot. But Bowers did it on a whole nother level. Bowers is going to be up there in terms of the overall catch leaders. He should have the record for rookie tight end, most receiving yardage ever, and the most catches by a rookie all time. Unbelievable. Bowers and Laporta, these seasons should not be brushed aside by fantasy managers. Both of these players are both a certain archetype of tight end. 6'4", 250 pounds or lighter, more like overgrown wide receivers. That sort of profile is easier for NFL teams to sort of emulate. This is also a copycat league where you can't expect everyone to end up like Brock Bowers or even Laporta for that matter. There's not going to be another Brock Bowers for several years. He is truly elite, special player. But you're going to see NFL teams try to find this model. And this is a draft class where there are multiple tight ends that are appealing. Colston Loveland from Michigan, Tyler Warren from Penn State. Write those two names down. There could be NFL teams out there saying, I can draft these guys and I can use them like Bowers. I can use them like Laporta. I can get instant impact off of these players, and I never have to pay them the same amount of money as I would a wide receiver. So there's a lot of game theory with this with NFL teams, but it's a copycat league. And sticking with the tight end position, this sort of model of player that we're seeing with Brock Bowers and Trey McBride, we have two elite target earners at the top of the tight end position. Expect to see Trey McBride and Brock Bowers among the tight end leaders in redraft and in dynasty rankings for years to come. And again, this is a model in a copycat league. Don't be surprised if some teams down the road try to emulate this model. Trey McBride, Brock Bowers, NFL teams are going to be chasing that next player. You're going to see tight ends drafted a little bit higher in terms of the actual NFL draft, and you're going to see more teams enthusiastically drafting these pass-catching specialists at the tight end position. There's many more lessons learned this season. We got to talk about one more interesting one, the year two offensive coordinators. A lot of times in fantasy football, we get extremely excited about an offense with a brand new offensive coordinator. But this year, two of the leading scoring teams in football were the Baltimore Ravens and the Buffalo Bills. Both of those teams had year two offensive coordinators. Todd Monken evolved the Baltimore offense and took it a step further. Certainly having Derrick Henry helped, but Todd Monken was absolutely lights out as a signal caller in year two. Joe Brady took over mid-season last year in Buffalo, then ends up losing both the starting wide receivers in Buffalo this offseason, Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis. And Brady has this unbelievable run of offensive production in Buffalo with new players all around Josh Allen. So next season, let's make sure that we're keeping an eye on year two offensive coordinators. Don't just concentrate on these new offensive coordinators that are going to be hired over the next few months. That's always exciting. It's always a great one to galaxy brain their involvement. But looking at offensive minds like Liam Cohen, like Kellen Moore, like Dave Canales, taking a huge step forward in year two, that's one thing that we need to pocket away as fantasy managers. And speaking of Baltimore and Buffalo, one thing that I expect to see in 2025 is the truly elite quarterbacks not being underdrafted like they were this season. Now, certainly there was values to be had at the quarterback position. It was actually a very easy year. If you drafted Joe Burrow or Jaden Daniels in every draft, you had an impact quarterback who you were able to get as a low-end QB1. But that doesn't diminish the impact of Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. The truly elite players at the quarterback position, Lamar Jackson gave you about 9 points per game more than the QB12. Think about that. You draft Lamar Jackson this year, drafted him as a QB4 overall at ADP, you were able to get an incredible amount of production. And with Josh Allen, you were able to get an incredible amount of production and also late season spike weeks when it mattered the most. Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson were drafted very highly in 2023. These two guys were guys that settled in around the 2-3 turn or earlier in some drafts. This year, the market pushed those guys down. Next year, look for both of those players, a huge market correction with both of those players being drafted more highly towards their 2023 levels. We're not going to give out that sort of discount anymore. Also have to talk about another year where smaller running backs continue to make an impact. And last year, it seemed like sort of an aberration where the lower BMI players all finished as RB1s last year. And it was sort of an aberration where Jahmyr Gibbs, Devon Achane, James Cook, Kyron Williams, all sub 195-pound players, and they all ended up being RB1s. that seemed like it was like sort of a one-off, sort of a year where things sort of fell their way. But again, we're seeing another player in that cut from that same cloth, exploding up the dynasty rankings, exploding up the redraft rankings, and that's Bucky Irving. So another year, another smaller dynamic running back is able to come in and make an instant impact. Keep an open mind this year. Teams are copycats in this league. Much like we talked about for some of the other positions, like tight end, teams, especially in running back by committee teams that are utilizing two backs, are going to look to accumulate and acquire these sort of explosive, high-value touch players to complement a back who can take on some volume. So think about these archetypes like Bucky Irving. If the talent profile is right and they land well, these sort of players can thrive in the NFL. It's the age of the running back by committee. These kind of guys are what you're looking for. Guys who can do a whole lot with 15 to 18 touches. Players who can catch the ball, players who have speed. NFL teams are going to be more open-minded to this after the last two seasons. Just think about the last two draft classes collectively. Devon Achane, Jahmyr Gibbs, Bucky Irving. There were so many people saying these guys were too small to thrive in the NFL. Guess what? All three of them have gained an exceptional amount of dynasty value. Add in Kyren Williams, add in James Cook from the previous draft class. This is a trend. Pay attention to these trends. They help you become a better fantasy manager. I'm Theo Gremminger. We're dropping videos like this all off season long at Fantasy Points, and we'll see you soon.